this morning we're going to start with a presentation, and I'll give a little bit of background here on what we're going to be looking at. David Peshkin is with Applied Pavement Technologies. He's been there since 1996 when he started as vice president. He's done a tremendous amount for the pavement preservation industry over the years, focusing on preventive maintenance and preservation, pavement evaluation, design, tech transfer, and research. I mean, without him doing some of the educational stuff that's been put out there over the years and stuff, I don't know where we'd be. He, of course, is a graduate of the University of Illinois. He has a BS and an MS in civil engineering and holds a BA in history. So with that, I'll turn it over to David and let him get started.
One thing I've realized in looking at those brief bios, it's come to my attention that I hold the same title in my company that I was given when I started in 1996. I hope the rest of you have had more advancement in your careers. I guess I'm getting reflective and trying to think how I might have done things differently if I had another shot at it. Anyway, I'm going to talk about a little bit different topic. It's the practices for maintaining and resurfacing existing composite pavements as shown here. This is an FHWA project, and so a presentation about an FHWA project that has the FHWA's blessings must include caveats and warnings and penalties, and so that's the purpose of this slide, so please embrace and implement this as best you can. All right, so also, you'll note in the presentation there's a plethora, that means a lot, of acronyms, and here are some of them, hopefully all of them. So a little bit of background about the project. First of all, what are we talking about when we use the term composite pavements? So composite pavements are pavements that are constructed out of both asphalt or that exist with both asphalt and concrete layers. By far, the most common type of composite pavement that we run into is asphalt over concrete, but there are other types of composite pavements, concrete over asphalt, asphalt over concrete, which will include, they're put together both over time, asphalt going over concrete after a period of time, and sometimes in new construction, with a underlying concrete pavement with asphalt placed on top. In terms of the magnitude of the situation, I won't call it the magnitude of the problem, although some might see it that way. We have we added up 91,000 total center lines, miles of composite pavements. I suspect when you throw in local agencies, that number skyrockets. And, but we're pretty certain that 9,500 of those center line miles are on interstate pavements. So why are we even here talking about it? Well, the primary problem with composite pavements that we look at is reflective cracking. And I'm sure any of you agencies that have composite pavements are familiar with this problem. It's a most significant problem for jointed concrete pavements and less significant for continuously reinforced concrete pavements. The causes of composite pavements are identified here. We're not going to go into them, although we will revisit a little bit of this later on. And as you'll see in the presentation, there are a range of different approaches that are used to address this primary challenge for composite pavements. So broadly categorizing those different approaches, we can break them down into three different categories. One is the set of treatments that are used to delay the onset of reflection cracking. The second is that group of treatments that attenuates or reduces the source of cracking, and in particular reduces the spacing of the cracks in the underlying concrete. And then the third is the set of practices, and primarily one practice that controls the cracking. This acknowledges that the cracking is going to come through no matter what you do, and controls it by anticipating and addressing the location of where those cracks are going to come through. As noted at the bottom, with these different techniques, even within a single group of approaches, there's a lot of variation on performance and effectiveness. So where some might find crack control to be very effective, others have found it to be not effective at all. So there's no one size fits all, if you will. One of the takeaways would not be at the end of the presentation, you'll have the magic bullet that resolves reflection cracking in composite pavements. So a little bit of background on the Composite Pavements project. This particular project started a couple years ago. So if you've got your COVID calendar, this would place it toward the beginning of COVID. It was a follow-on, though, to a couple of other nationwide investigations of composite pavement issues. There was a Sharp 2 R21 project in 2013 that was a nationwide study, and then a nationwide implementation focusing on new composite pavements. So this project that started in 2020, the overall project objective is stated here. And then just to mention that this isn't the only initiative that FHWA is supporting. It's also an important part of EDC 6, Targeted Overlay Pavement Solutions, or TOPS. So a little bit about what was accomplished or is being accomplished during this project. So it has much the same form as a lot of typical research projects. Collect information consisting of going back and looking at publications, reports done by others, a national peer exchange, and then meetings, visits with selected SHAs, state highway agencies, that would form the basis of case studies. In compiling information, a peer exchange summary report was prepared, and then individual DOT summary reports. And then the third step in the work approach is disseminating information, finalizing the documents. I think this is, there are a few in particular, I'm thinking of the state summary reports that need to be finalized. And then outreach. The outreach consists of speaking at forums such as this, and then there's a webinar that is scheduled for October, I believe, and there's already 300 and some people that have signed up for that. But if you are not one of them and the topic is still interesting to you after this presentation, I encourage you to sign up. I think it's only 2 hours long. 90 minutes, even better. Get the same knowledge that I'm going to give you in 30 minutes in 90. So a little bit, a quick overview of those different phases. The literature review focused on the last 10 years. And that's important because there have been a number of changes from some of the typical ways that have been used to address composite pavements in the past. And again, we focused on AC overlays of existing concrete, so we didn't look at AC over new concrete. And the sub-bullets there identify some of the factors that we were looking at. We had a national peer exchange, of course, virtual, because Nobody could go anywhere. Again, if you're in your COVID calendar, this is about a year after the onset. Nobody was traveling. So we had, I think it was a 2-day, partial days workshop. There were about 40 attendees. You can see on the map, the yellow states highlighted are locations where we had representatives from academia. The blue are state DOTs that participated in the peer exchange. And the peer exchange included presentations from the states and from the faculty who are involved in research on composite pavements. And our goal was to capture what different agencies are doing, to hear about their experiences and the success or near success of their practices. So the report from that peer exchange is available. There's a link at the bottom. You can either capture that or when the presentations are distributed, that should be available to you as well. We followed up the National Peer Exchange after sort of getting the lay of the land and seeing in more detail what people were doing. We had individual meetings with state DOTs, and these were a combination of virtual meetings and in-person meetings. We met with Illinois and Indiana in particular in person, and had, I think the rest of them were virtual. And as a result of those, we developed a brief report with key takeaways and then a case study reports that highlighted the agency's practices and experiences with composite pavements. So as I mentioned, the third aspect of the work was disseminating information, the outreach. Here's a summary of what was produced, and as I mentioned, we're in that last set, the outreach events, the webinar that's coming up, and speaking at conferences, of which this is one. So a summary of agency experience with composite pavements, just to sort of get a feel for the landscape of these practices. You can see who's doing a lot of it, who's doing a fair amount of it, and then who's not doing very much at all. I suspect there are other agencies that fall into this category, so that's why I think the numbers may be a little higher. In terms of their design and performance experience, some takeaways here. First of all, on average, they're letting their concrete pavements go for about 30 years before they turn them into composite pavements. An important point here, they're often, the composite pavement, the addition of the asphalt overlay is quite often not designed. So here they're using a standard design and with a specified overlay thickness, almost independent of how we might characterize the needs for a rehabilitation project. So that typical thickness might be as little as 2 inches and as much as 5 inches. In the past, the practice would be to use a conventional dense graded asphalt mix as the asphalt overlay mix design, but in our interactions with agencies, we saw a growing interest in and use of both stone matrix and binder-rich inner layers to improve the performance of their composite pavements. And speaking of performance, what we heard from agencies is that they typically get about 15 years out of what we refer to as the first generation overlay, that first treatment that they put on top of the pavement, and that declined in subsequent overlays. So the subsequent generation overlays lasted as little as 6 inches and maybe as long as 14 inches, but there was always a decrease in performance in subsequent overlays. We also found that there was better performance in more moderate climates and on asphalt placed over continuously reinforced concrete than on jointed concrete pavement. And of course, that's to be expected because those are less demanding instances. The pavement is moving less, either because of less temperature cycling and much longer joint spacing or shorter crack spacing that you get with continuously reinforced concrete pavements. We also found that reflective cracking, as reported by the agencies, typically occurred after a little under 5 years. And that sort of fits the rule of thumb, which we didn't see anything to dispute, and that is that reflection cracking typically progresses at about the rate of an inch a year, so that, with a maximum of 5 inches, you would expect to see reflection cracking start to occur no later than 5 years after placement of the overlay. So that's sort of the background. Why did they place the asphalt overlay? You can see the list of reasons that were given, starting with functional improvements and followed by structural improvements and other issues. And of course, rarely was it a single reason for placing the overlay. It was often a combination of these that triggered the use of an asphalt overlay over the concrete pavement as the treatment of choice. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the primary performance problem with composite pavements is reflection cracking. So what have agencies done to mitigate reflection cracking? And the list of practices is summarized here. Starting with repairs being the most common. Again, you'll see there's a relatively small sample size, and going down to do nothing, which one agency embraced. How did they evaluate the pavements? So, first of all, there was the option of not evaluating the pavement at all, because if you think back, a number of them just went to programmed overlay thicknesses based on a design chart or something that said, this is what you're going to do, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches. So this is 16 responding agencies, and you can see there was an equal mix of coring, roughness, and condition surveys, and then non-destructive testing, FWD, and ground penetrating radar. In terms of the M&R that they performed on existing pavements, again, you can see the summary of practices, again, with 16 responding agencies to a survey on their practices. You can see how they approach this. So next I want to talk about some of the key takeaways from the agency's practices. And this is based not only on the results of the meetings with the states or the peer exchanges, but also what was found in the literature. So in terms of pavement evaluation, condition surveys played a role, as did coring, and also secondary methods as shown in that previous slide that included falling weight deflectometer and ground penetrating radar. Those could be useful in determining whether there was a need for a structural overlay. And then some agencies reported on other methods much less frequently, travel speed, deflection, friction measurement, and dynamic cone penetrometer. Some of the things that they were looking for that might tell them that they need to place an asphalt overlay included looking at their rate of patching, and were they experiencing an increased rate of or need for patching, growth in the amount and the severity levels of cracking, and then an increase in roughness. On existing composite pavements, they looked at reflection cracking, and in particular reflection cracking deterioration, deterioration of the paving joints. So of course that's a common separate problem, but in the asphalt overlay, getting opening at the longitudinal joint would be another trigger for another overlay, and excessive roughness and possibly rutting. In design and materials, as I mentioned, one of the common practices was to use standard thicknesses or policy overlays, so no design at all. A number of agencies also looked at formal overlay design procedures. For more major rehabilitation, this would take you more towards a structural rehabilitation. And some agencies that use AASHTO ME design for new pavement design might still use 93 AASHTO for overlay design. Other considerations included thicknesses to meet existing grades, to control the size of the project. As I mentioned at the beginning, typical thicknesses ranged from 2 to 5 inches, and these were quite often placed in multiple lifts. One of the most interesting takeaways, I think, is the materials that have been used in the asphalt overlays as part of composite pavements. And that's because a number of the agencies that we talked to that were reporting success were using the modified mixtures. And in particular, the high binder inner layers, the brick, which is the binder-rich intermediate course, that I think is New Jersey's stock and trade for this, and CAM, which is the crack attenuating mixture. And again, these reflected a bit of a departure from the use of dense graded asphalt as the conventional overlay material. New Jersey, so along those lines, New Jersey reported a 10 years of additional life compared to their use of dense graded asphalt in their asphalt overlays. There's also an increased use of quality surface layers. Not to say that dense graded asphalt isn't a quality material, but maybe that should mean sort of higher quality surface materials, such as the ultra-thin bonded wearing course, the stone matrix, the Hepto, which again is New Jersey, the high performance thin overlay. A lot more use around the country of SMA as a material that's durable and rutting and crack resistant, and of course an increased use of polymers in these materials. This summarizes the overlay preparation and construction, including pre-overlay repairs and milling, and then reflective crack control measures. So again, I suggested at the beginning that in that list, in that approach, there's the asphalt inner layer, there's fractured slabs, pre-overlay repair and slab stabilization, geosynthetic paving fabric inner layers, and some saw and seal. In construction, they focused on proper tack coat application, which of course is appropriate anytime you're placing asphalt either over concrete or over existing asphalt, placing in multiple lifts, and paying closer attention to the longitudinal paving joint. In terms of maintenance and rehabilitation of these pavements, common practices included crack sealing and the use of mastics to repair some of the wider cracks, patching, microsurfacing, and slurry seals, and so forth. In terms of second generation or subsequent generation overlays, some of the things that triggered those included more reflective cracking through the underlying overlay and the opening up of the longitudinal joint in that first generation overlay. In terms of reconstruction, so taking this from a composite pavement to a new pavement, the drivers included significantly increased traffic volumes, outdated geometrics, the observation that they were doing rehabilitation more and more frequently, and then just loss of structural support. So, concluding remarks. First of all, we noted that best practices seem to include a systems approach for composite pavements, and that included evaluating the pavement, targeting the right pavement, determining whether you needed to restore support or whether you could just go ahead with a programmed overlay, using higher quality materials, so some of the modified mixes and surface courses that would help to mitigate reflection cracking, reduce the severity of the cracks, slow down the progression of the cracks through the surface. Of course, high-quality construction, which is not unique to composite pavements, and nor is timely maintenance. Some of the identified gaps, I know it was pointed out to me, I think in an offhand comment earlier this week, that researchers, of course, like to promote the practice of additional research. Some of the identified gaps include identifying when is it no longer appropriate. So instead of just going ahead and doing these overlays over overlays, what are the conditions that should encourage you to back off and do something different? How much field testing should occur? There were a number of agencies that did minimal field evaluation and testing, and there were a number that said doing a proper amount of evaluation was really key to the success of their program. And then identifying what needs to be done to extend the life of that second generation and subsequent generations of overlays from more than half, so down to 6 years at a minimum, to closer to the original life of the first overlay over 10 to 15 years. How many cycles are possible? Can you do this in perpetuity, or do you draw the line somewhere? And so on. So end of the presentation, I do want to recognize the principal investigator is my colleague Kurt Smith at Applied Pavement Technology, and Steve Cooper in the back corner there at FHWA was our technical lead on this and oversaw the project. So if you have any hard questions, I would start with Steve and then go to Kurt.
David, do you know if there's been any work in, I know ASHTO Pavement ME is continually evolving and looking, adding more modules and things like that. But I think one of the things that would help the states more or the most would be some sort of design module in there for not only your second and your third generation overlays, but ones after that. And maybe part of that module needs to say, look, your pavement's done, you need to do something else, and just kill off the idea of putting more asphalt on it. Do you know if that's in the works or if there's any headway in going that way?
That's a good question, John. I don't know if that's in the works. I suspect that since ASHTO ME struggles with addressing the effects of maintenance on performance of pavements, that there's some ways away from something as fine-tuned as, say, using different materials in the asphalt to get better performance, and the performance effect of different mitigation strategies that would extend the life. Simply, there's probably not enough data collected to allow them to model that, but yeah, my guess is short answer, no.
Thank you, David.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.